The night Jonah Teague came back from the dead, I was the one who opened the door, and for a breath I near reached for my hat to go say words over a grave. He stood out there in the blowing wet snow with the lamp from the porch washing yellow over a face I'd helped carry through a fever 16 years before, and my old heart climbed up into my throat and would not come down. A man learns, doctoring, not to startle easy. I startled then. I'm Amos Tilley. I doctored the Quemada Basin 41 years, from the time the Camino Seco road was a rumor and a set of wagon ruts to the time it carried the mail twice a week, and I have set more bones and closed more eyes than I care to count. I am telling you this one because I was there for the worst of it and the best of it both, and because a man my age has earned the right to tell the stories he cannot let go of. This is the story of Marin Halloway, who kept a lamp burning for 7 winters at a relief station below Pardo Butte, and of the man the whole basin had buried, and of how he came walking back over her porch in the spring thaw with snow melting in his beard. You have to understand what that road was. The Camino Seco ran up out of the low country, climbed the long shoulder of Pardo Butte, and crossed a high cold bench where the wind never quit, then dropped again toward the freight towns on the far side. Halfway up that grade, where a man and a tired team most needed it, sat the Halloway station, a long low house of squared timber and river stone, a barn, a corral, a well, and a hand-painted board that read food and beds and fresh horses. Marin ran it. Her father had built it, and when he died of a bad winter cough she buried him behind the corral and kept it going alone, and she was good at it. She fed teamsters and drovers and the occasional fool who tried the grade in a buggy. She kept fires lit and a kettle on, and a lamp in the front window that the freighters steered by in the dark, the way a sailor steers by a light on a headland. She was not a soft woman to look at, and she'd have told you so first. She was tall and plain and strong through the shoulders from years of swinging an axe and a pitchfork, with weather in her face and a way of looking straight at you that some men found unsettling. But there was a stillness in her that I always thought of as the stillness of deep water, and a kindness that ran down past where most people's kindness gives out. I saw her wrap her own coat around a half-frozen male rider and then go cold herself rather than let on. I saw her sit up 3 nights with a teamster's sick child and ask nothing for it. The basin knew she was decent. The basin also thought she was a fool, and that is the part of this I am ashamed to have shared in. Because Marin Halloway was waiting for Jonah Teague, and Jonah Teague was dead. Everybody said so. They'd grown up, the two of them, along that road, him on a hardscrabble claim 2 miles down the grade, her at the station. They'd been promised to each other since they were old enough to know what the word meant, and there wasn't a soul in the basin who'd have bet against them. Then the army came recruiting scouts for a far campaign in the dry country south, men who knew how to read ground and live off little, and Jonah signed. He was young and he had no money, and a man could come home from a campaign with enough wages to start a herd. He told Marin he'd be back inside 2 years, and they'd put their names together over at Coldwater Bend, and he rode off down the grade with his hat pulled low so she wouldn't see his face, and that was the last the basin saw of him. For a while the letters came. Then they came less. Then there was a long bad season of nothing, and then word drifted up the road the way word does that there'd been a fight in a place none of us could find on a map, that a column had been cut off in broken country, that men had been killed or worse, taken. And after that the report. It came back through the freight office at Coldwater Bend, official as such things ever were out there, carried up the grade by the man who ran the freight contract, Royce Deaver. Jonah Teague, scout, presumed killed in action, no remains recovered. Deaver read it out in the front room of the station with his hat in his hands and a face arranged for the occasion, and Marin stood very straight and thanked him and did not weep where he could see it, and Deaver rode back down the grade, and that, the basin agreed, was the end of Jonah Teague. I should tell you about Royce Deaver, because he is part of this whether I like it or not. Deaver and Jonah had been partners on that hardscrabble claim before the army, 2 young men with one good idea between them and not much else. When Jonah went south, the claim sat. Land left sitting on a road that's growing gets taken up by men with paper and patience, and Deaver was such a man. By the time the death report came, he'd already got himself a freight contract in a building in Coldwater Bend. And within a year of the report, he'd filed and proved up the old claim, Jonah's claim and his both. But with Jonah dead, it was Deaver's alone. And there was good water on it, and the road ran right past it. And Royce Deaver was on his way to being the most comfortable man in the basin. He wore a town coat now and was called Mr., and he gave money to the church, and he was, by every measure the basin used, a success. I have known a good many successful men. A fair number of them I would not trust to hold my horse. Now here is the thing that made the basin call Maren a fool. She did not believe Jonah was dead. Not at first out of foolishness, at first out of a thing I'd call principle. No remains recovered, she said to me once, the words flat and exact, the way she said most things. That means they didn't find him, Amos. It doesn't mean he's under the ground. It means they didn't look long. There's a difference, and I'll hold to it. And she held to it. The first winter she held to it the way a person holds to hope. The second winter she held to it the way a person holds to a habit. By the fifth and the sixth, I think she held to it the way a person holds to the one thing that has come to stand for who they are, so that letting go of it would be a kind of dying. She kept the lamp in the front window lit every night, not just on dark nights, every night. And when a teamster asked her once why she burned good oil on a clear moonlit evening, she told him, "So a man walking can find it," and went on about her work. And the teamster came down the grade and told it at Coldwater Bend, and the basin shook its head over its coffee and said, "That poor woman." Royce Deaver asked her to marry him. I want that on the record because it matters to what came after. He asked her twice. Once in the third year, decent enough about it, a man of property could do worse, and she could do better than a cold bed and a dead man and so on. She turned him down quiet. He asked again in the fifth year, and that time there was an edge to it, because by then a man like Deaver does not like to be reminded that there is anything in the basin he wants and cannot buy. And he reminded her, just lightly, that the road might be regraded one day, and routes change, and a station that finds itself off the new road is a station that finds itself with no trade. She thanked him for his concern and turned him down again, and that was the end of Royce Deaver asking, and the beginning, I have come to think, of Royce Deaver wanting Jonah Teague to stay good and dead. So that was the shape of things in the basin the winter this story turns on. 7 years gone. A lamp in a window. A woman the country pitied and a man the country envied, and a road that climbed up over Pardo Butte into the wind, carrying everything but the one thing that woman wanted. It was a hard winter, that seventh one. The snow came early and stayed and came again. I made my rounds on a tough little mule because a horse would founder in the drifts, and I came up the grade to the Halloway station maybe twice that whole season, and both times Maren was thin and steady, and the lamp was lit, and the kettle was on, and she fed me and asked after the basin's sick, and sent me back down with biscuits in my coat. The last time in late February, with the thaw still weeks off, I told her, God forgive me, I told her that maybe it was time. "Maren," I said, 7 winters. A man's got to let a thing be finished so he can start the next thing. So do you, there's no shame in it. There'd be no shame in any of it. And she looked at me with that deep-water stillness and she said, "Amos, you've doctored half this basin. When you couldn't save a man, did you stop sitting with him because it was finished? Or did you sit with him because he wasn't gone yet?" I didn't have an answer for that, and I rode home down the grade in the cold with my face hot. And I did not bring it up to her again. The thaw came in the 3rd week of March, all at once, the way it does in that country. One day the snow lay heavy and silent, and the icicles hung from the eaves like teeth, and the next a warm wind came up out of the low country and the world began to run with water. The creeks rose and the road turned to soup and then began to dry, and the high bench let go of its snow in great gray slabs, and there came a few nights of that wet drifting snow that is half rain, the last gasp of the winter going out. It was on one of those nights, the snow turning to water as it touched the ground, that the dog at the station, Marin kept a big shaggy gray dog named Boone, set up a barking that wouldn't quit. And Marin, who'd learned to read that dog the way she read the road, took down the lamp from the window and opened the front door and held it up, and out of the dark and the wet at the bottom of her steps there stood a man. I had this next part from her after, told quiet across a kitchen table, so I'll tell it the way she told it. She said she did not know him. That is the thing she came back to, telling it. 7 years she had kept a face lit up in her mind, young and sun-browned and laughing under a hat pulled low, and the man standing in her snow was none of that. He was gaunt to the bone. His beard was gray-shot and his hair hung long, and his coat was a soldier's coat gone to rags, and a thing he'd traded for, and a thing he'd made, all sewn together. And he stood crooked on his feet like a man who has walked a very long way on a leg that does not entirely work anymore. His eyes, she said, were the worst of it, not dead, but gone far off. The eyes of a man who has been somewhere a person isn't meant to come back from and has come back anyway and isn't sure yet that he should have. She held the lamp up and she did not know him, and her first thought, she said, was a teamster gone off the road in the snow, half froze, and she started toward him to help. And he said her name, just that, Marin, in a voice gone to gravel from cold and from disuse. And the way he said it, she said the way he said it she could not have told you in words, only that it was the way you say a name you have said 10,000 times in the dark to keep yourself from going under. And the lamp shook in her hand, and the light jumped over that ruined face, and underneath the years and the gray and the far-off look she found, the way you find a creek bed under snow by the lay of the land, the boy she'd watched ride down the grade with his hat pulled low. And she did not scream and she did not faint, because she was Marin Halloway and she was made of better stuff than that. But she said the lamp slid right out of her hand and broke on the porch boards and the oil flared up blue and she didn't even look at it. She came down the steps and she took that ragged man by the front of his coat with both hands, the way you'd take hold of something to keep the wind from carrying it off. And she said, and this is the part that I have never been able to tell without my voice going, she said, I knew. I told them and I told them. I knew. It was Boone barking that brought the nearest neighbor, and the neighbor's boy that came down the grade in the mud at first light and pounded on my door, and I came up on the mule fast as the road would let me, because the message was, Doc, Marin Halloway's got a half-dead man at the station, and she won't let go of him. I found them in the front room. She'd got him into a chair by the fire and got coffee into him and a blanket around him, and she was on her knees in front of the chair with both his hands in both of hers, and she would not move when I came in, only said, It's Jonah, Amos, it's Jonah, look at him, it's Jonah. And I looked at him, and I will tell you the truth, I had to look a good while. But I had set this man's collarbone when he was a boy, and I had pulled a fishhook out of his thumb, and I knew the shape of his hands. And after a while I knew him too, and I sat down hard in the other chair because my legs would not hold me. He was in a bad way. That much was doctor's work and I could do it. He was starved down to rope and bone, and there was a wound in his thigh, old and badly healed, that had left the leg crooked and weak, a ball, I judged, that had gone in and been dug out by somebody who knew less than they should have, a long time ago. He had frost in 2 toes that I was able, thank God, to save. He had a cough I didn't like and a fever coming up, but none of that was what worried me most. What worried me most was the way he sat there with Marin holding his hands and looked at her like a man looking at water he isn't sure he's allowed to drink. He flinched from kindness. I have seen it in men who have been a long time somewhere terrible. They come to expect that every soft thing is the front edge of a hard thing, and they brace for it. And you have to teach them slow that the soft thing is just a soft thing. Jonah Teague had unlearned how to be cared for, and watching Marin teach it back to him over the weeks that came was one of the finer things I've been let to witness. He didn't talk much at first, and what he told in pieces, over days, mostly to her and sometimes to me when I was changing the dressing on that leg and his guard was down. I'll give it to you whole, though it didn't come whole. The column had been cut off, like the rumor said, in broken, dry country far to the south. Most had been killed. Jonah and a handful had been taken, not by the enemy in the war the way we'd have understood it, but carried off into a hard country by men who used captured men for labor and ransom and worse, and traded them on like livestock from one outfit to another, deeper and deeper south where no report would ever reach. He'd taken the ball in the leg in the first fight, and it had near killed him, and then it had saved him in a way, because a man who can't run isn't watched as close. He'd labored in a place that broke the men he was with, one after another. He'd buried, he said once, more friends in that country than the basin held living souls, and then he stopped talking for the rest of that day. How long he'd been there he wasn't sure. Time in a place like that, he said, goes to mush. You mark it by the men who die. But there came a season when the outfit holding him broke up and scattered the way such outfits do, and in the scattering he got loose and he started walking north. He had nothing, no horse, no boots half the way, no idea most days where the next water was. He walked, he said, the better part of a year. He worked when he could, a day here for a meal, and stole when he had to and wasn't proud of it, and got robbed once of everything down to his coat and built that ragged coat back up out of what he could find. And the whole of that year, he said, and this he said to her, not to me, but I was in the room, the whole of that year the one thing that kept his feet moving north was a lamp. I'd see it, he said. Not real, in my head. Your window. I knew if I could get up that grade there'd be a lamp in your window because you'd have kept it lit. I knew you'd have kept it lit. And Marin, who had not wept once that I'd seen in 7 years, put her face down on his hands and wept like the spring creeks were running, and he put his ruined hand on her hair like he wasn't sure it was allowed, and then like it was. Now, I'd like to tell you the basin took him back with open arms, and that was the happy end of it. The basin is people, and people are a mixed business. There was wonder, surely. A dead man come home is a wonder, and they came up the grade to see it. More visitors than that station had ever had, until Marin had to put a stop to it because the gawping was wearing on him. There was kindness in plenty too. There always is. But there was something else underneath. An unease that took me a while to name, and when I named it I did not like it. It was this. The basin had spent 7 years agreeing that Marin Holloway was a fool, and a dead man walking up her grade made the basin wrong. People do not always forgive you for being right about a thing they were wrong about. There were those who'd have been quietly more comfortable if Jonah had stayed dead, and Marin had stayed a sad story they could shake their heads over. I am not proud to know that about my neighbors, but I doctored them long enough to know it. And there was Royce Deaver. I happened to be at the station the day Deaver came up the grade, 2 weeks or so after Jonah's return, and I am glad I was. He came in his good coat in a hired buggy, and he came in smiling, and the smile was the smile of a man who has decided how to play a bad hand. He shook Jonah's hand. Jonah, sitting in the chair by the fire, took it slow, the way he took everything, and Deaver said all the right things. Praise God. A miracle. The whole basin rejoices. He'd brought a basket. He sat, and he was warm, and he was generous, and he was, to anyone not watching close, a fine old friend overjoyed at a partner's return. But I was watching close, doctoring being mostly watching, and I saw the things underneath. I saw Deaver's eyes go once around that front room and land on the lamp Marin had set back in the window, a new lamp. The old one broke on the porch, and I saw something pass over his face, gone quick. And I saw Jonah watching Deaver the way a man who has lived among hard men watches another man, with a flat, unhurried attention that gives nothing back. And I understood that whatever fog had come over Jonah from his years in that country, it had not touched his judgment of men. He knew exactly what Royce Deaver was. He'd partnered with him. And there was a question sitting in that room that nobody had said out loud yet, and it sat there while Deaver talked, and the question was, where is my claim, Royce? Where is the land my name was on? Deaver got to it himself smooth before anyone had to ask. He set down his coffee and he leaned forward all sympathy, and he said, well, Jonah, you'll want to know how things stand, and there's hard truth in it, and I won't dress it up. When the report came, the death report, You understand, official, no remains. We all grieved you, the claim sat. And the land office won't let good land sit on a road. And to keep it from going to some stranger, Deaver had filed and proved it up himself, at his own cost and labor all these years. He'd held it, he said, the way you'd hold a thing for a man's memory. And of course, he said, of course, now that Jonah was alive, and here the smile got very warm, they'd find a way to make it right. There were costs to recover, naturally. Years of taxes and improvements. A claim proved up was a different thing in law than a claim abandoned. It would take some working out. But between old partners, surely, it could be worked out fair. It was beautifully done. I'll grant the devil that. It put the whole thing in the language of friendship and law, and made the man who'd taken the land sound like the man who'd saved it. And it buried the real shape of the deal. That Jonah would buy back his own land from the man who'd profited from calling him dead, at whatever price Deaver named, and be grateful for the chance. Buried it so deep that a tired, sick man in a chair might have nodded and thanked him. Jonah didn't nod. He looked at the fire a while. Then he said in that gravel voice, slow, the report said no remains recovered. Deaver said, yes, that's right, a terrible thing. And Jonah said, who carried it up the grade, the report? And Deaver easy said why, he had himself, he'd felt it his duty as the man's partner. And Jonah looked at him then, and I have thought about that look many times since. It was not anger. Anger I'd have understood. It was a kind of sorrow, the sorrow of a man who has hoped against the evidence about somebody and has just had the hope taken away. Royce, he said, I scouted 4 years for the army. You know what a scout does, he reads sign. He reads what men leave behind them where they've been, what they meant by it. And I've been reading you since you walked in that door. He let that sit. Then, we'll talk about the land, not today, I'm tired today. And he turned his face back to the fire and he was done talking. And Deaver, after a moment, gathered himself up and made his goodbyes, still smiling, and went out to his buggy. But the smile didn't reach as far as it had coming in, and I walked him out, doctorly and neighborly. And at the buggy he turned to me and said, lo, he's not right, Amos. Anyone can see it. A man comes back from a thing like that, his mind's gone soft. Somebody'll need to look after his affairs. And he gave me a look that was an invitation to be the somebody, with a cut in it for me, and I said, Royce, his body's in poor shape. His mind's the sharpest thing in this basin, and you felt it just now, which is why you're telling me it's soft. Deaver didn't like that. He drove off down the grade, and I watched him go, and I thought, there is going to be trouble, and I was right. But it was not the kind of trouble I feared. Because here is what Jonah Teague did about Royce Deaver, and it is the part of this story I most want told, because the basin expected one thing and Jonah did another, and the difference is the whole measure of the man. He got well slow through that spring. Marin fed him back to strength a spoonful at a time and walked him up and down the grade on that bad leg until it would hold him, and the far-off look came back from wherever it had gone, not all the way but enough. And as he got well, he did a quiet thing. He didn't ride down to Coldwater Bend with a gun, the way half the basin half expected, and a few of them, God help us, half hoped for the entertainment of it. He sat at Marin's kitchen table of evenings and he wrote letters. He had Marin help him with the words, her hand being better than his, but the thoughts were his. He wrote to the army, to a quartermaster's office and a records office and a man he'd served under who'd lived. He wrote to the land office, asking plain for the file on his claim and the dates on every paper in it. He wrote, careful, to a lawyer in the territorial capital that I'd had dealings with and trusted. And he waited. A man who has walked north for a year knows how to wait. He let the law of the thing come together slow and solid, the way you build a fire that'll last. And it came together in its time the way the truth does when a patient man lays it out. The Army records, when they came, did not say what Royce Deaver had said. They did not say presumed killed, no remains. They said missing. There's a world of law in the difference. A missing man's claim does not pass, it waits. The death report Deaver had carried up the grade and read out in Marin's front room with his hat in his hands. That report, when the lawyer ran it down, had been a thing Deaver wrote himself, drawn from rumor, sworn before a clerk at Coldwater Bend who was a man Deaver paid, and filed as the foundation for proving up the claim. It was not a lie the Army told. It was a lie Royce Deaver told in the army's voice to a grieving woman and a basin full of neighbors, so that the land of a man who might yet be alive could be made, in law, the land of a dead one. He had not just taken the claim. He had buried Jonah on paper to do it. When that came clear, the basin's mood swung hard, the way a crowd's will. There was talk of a rope. There were men who'd shaken Deaver's hand in the church door now talking loud about justice in the saloon at Coldwater Bend, and I'll say plain that some of the loudest had been the surest, 2 months before, that Marin was a fool. People are a mixed business. And it came to an evening, late that spring, when a knot of those men rode up the grade to the station with their blood up and a notion of fetching Jonah down to lead them against Deaver. And they found him on the porch in the long gold light with Marin beside him and Boone lying across his feet. And they put it to him that the basin was with him, that Deaver had buried him alive on paper and stole his land and lied to his woman, and that it was time, and would he come? Jonah let them talk themselves out. Then he stood up off the porch rail, slow on the bad leg, and he said his piece, and I had it word for word from 3 men who were there because not a one of them ever forgot it. He said, "I've been in a country where men settled things with a rope and a gun, and the strongest outfit took what it wanted and called it law, and I buried near every friend I had in that country, and I walked a year to get out of it. I am not going to build that country here." He let it land. Royce Deaver lied. He's going to answer for it in front of a judge on paper in the open, where every soul in this basin can read it and know it. That's not me being soft. A rope's quick and it's over, and in a year the story's gone fuzzy and the man's half a hero for how he died. I want it slow. I want it in the record. I want my name took off that false grave by a court and Deaver's line nailed up where it can't be pulled down. He took the land with paper. I'll take it back with paper and it'll stay took. And then he said the thing that sent them home, he said, and I'll tell you what I want more than the land. I want to marry that woman behind me if she'll still have a wreck like me and live the rest of my days at the top of this grade, and I cannot do that with my hands bloody. So no, go home. The law's slow. I learned to wait. So can the basin. And they went home, sheepish some of them, but they went. It went the way he said it would. It took the better part of a year, these things do. But the lawyer in the Capitol was good, and the records were plain, and a judge looked at Royce Deaver's homemade death report and his bought clerk and did not care for any of it. The claim came back to Jonah. The false report was struck, and the truth set in the record in its place. And Deaver was made to answer for the fraud, not with a rope, but with the loss of the land he'd stolen and a fine and the far worse punishment, for a man like him, of being known. He'd been called Mr. He'd given to the church. Now every soul in the basin knew exactly what he'd done and how he'd done it, and a man standing, once that's known, does not come back. He sold out within 2 years and went down the road to start over where the story hadn't reached, and I won't pretend I was sorry to see the back of him, though Jonah, oddly, was the gentlest about him of anyone. He wanted to be a big man, Jonah said to me once late, and he didn't have the inside of one, so he stole the outside. I've been hungry. I know what it is to want a thing you haven't got. I just never figured a man be hungry enough to bury a friend for it. That was as hard as I ever heard him speak of Royce Deaver, and there was more pity in it than hate, which tells you the most about Jonah Teague of anything I could say. But I am getting ahead of the part that matters most, which is not the land and not Deaver at all. It is what passed between Jonah and Marin on the porch of that station, before any of the law was settled, when he was still half a wreck and the future was still all fog. It was an evening in May. The thaw was long done and the bench was greening and the cottonwoods down along the creek had leafed out, and the whole high country had that washed look it gets when the winter's finally gone for good. I'd come up to check the leg, and I was inside packing my bag, and the window was open, and I heard them on the porch. And I will confess to you that I did not announce myself but stood still inside the door and listened, because some part of me knew what was coming and could not have left if the house were afire. Jonah said, and his voice was steadier now, the gravel going out of it. Jonah said, "Marin, I have to say a thing and you have to let me say all of it before you say anything back." And she must have nodded, for he went on. He said, When I left, I was a boy and I made you a promise like a boy makes one, easy, like it cost nothing. Then I went and I learned what things cost. I cost you 7 years. 7 years of this basin calling you a fool, and you keeping that lamp lit and getting older and turning down a man with money and a roof while you waited on a dead boy. I did that to you. Not the army, not Deaver me, for signing up over wages. And I come back and I'm not the boy that left. I'm gray and I'm broke and I'll limp the rest of my life, and there's nights I'll wake up hollering and you'll have to lie there next to a man who's somewhere else. That's what I am now. And you've spent 7 years loving a thing that doesn't exist anymore, the boy who rode off. I won't have you trade your one life for the memory of him out of stubbornness, or out of being too proud to admit you waited for nothing. So I'm going to say it plain and I'm going to mean it, and it's going to be the hardest true thing I ever said. And he said, "You are free, Marin. Whatever you promised that boy, he's gone, and I let you out of it. If you've had your fill of waiting and this gray wreck isn't what you want at the end of it, you say so, and I'll thank you for the warm bed and the doctoring, and I'll take my claim when it comes back, and I'll live out my road down the grade and never hold one breath of it against you. You waited honest. You owe me nothing for it. So you choose not the boy, not the promise, me, the man on this porch today, knowing all of it." There was a long quiet. I stood inside the door and did not breathe. And then Marin Holloway spoke, and her voice was that flat, exact voice she said her truest things in, and she said, "Jonah Teague, you have just stood on my porch and told me what I love and don't love and what I waited for and why, and you've got it all wrong, and that's the most certain I've been in 7 years that it's you." She let that sit a second. "I didn't wait for a boy. I quit waiting for the boy a long time back. I'm not a child. I know 7 years changes a man. I waited for you. The one who'd come back. I didn't know you'd be gray. I didn't know you'd limp. I didn't know about the nights. I knew you'd come back changed, because anything worth coming back would. And I told this whole basin, and I told Amos Tilley, and I told myself in the cold every single night, not he's the same, Jonah. He's alive and he's mine and he's coming. That's what I knew. And here you are, gray and broke and hollering in the night, exactly the way a man would be who walked a year out of hell to a lamp in a window. You think that's a thing I'd send back down the grade?" And her voice broke just at the end, just on the last of it, the only time it did. "I'm not choosing the boy. There is no boy. I'm choosing the man on the porch. I've been choosing him every night for 7 winters in the dark. I'm just glad to finally do it where he can hear me. I came out then, because a man can only stand behind a door so long, and I made a great clatter with my bag, so they'd think I'd just come up. And I shook Jonah's hand and I kissed Marin's cheek, and I told them I was an old fool of a doctor and the happiest one in the territory. And I drove down the grade in the dark with my own face wet, and didn't care who saw, which was nobody, the road being empty, and the only light in the whole black sweep of the basin the one in that front window. Burning now, I knew, for a living man. They married that summer in the churchyard at Coldwater Bend, and the basin came, every soul of it, the ones who'd called her a fool, and the ones who'd been kind, and the ones, like me, who'd been some of both. And I stood up with Jonah because he had no people left and asked me to, the highest honor of my long life. The claim came back to him in the fall, with the false report struck from the record, and they didn't move down to it. They let it for grazing and kept the station, because the station was theirs and the lamp was the lamp. He never did fully lose the limp or the bad nights, but the nights got fewer, the way Marin's patience wore them down, and the far-off look went out of his eyes by inches over the years until it was gone, and the man who'd flinched from kindness on his first night by the fire became, in time, the most open-handed man on that whole road, the one who'd put up a stranded teamster for free and slip a blanket to a cold rider and never mention it. The basin came to love him. The basin even came around, after a while, to remembering that it had never really doubted Marin, which is a thing people do, and she let them have it, being too kind to remind them. They ran that station near 30 years together. They never had children of their own. The years and the wound had seen to that, and they didn't speak of it to me, but I understood. But I do not think there was a child on that road who didn't get fed at their table, or a young couple starting out who didn't get a leg up, or a soul caught in a blizzard on that grade who didn't steer in by the lamp in the window and find the door open. They built a home out of grit and a weight and a hard year's walking, and a home built out of those things is built to last, and theirs did. Marin went first, an old woman in her sleep in the deep of a winter the way she'd have wanted, with the lamp lit. I doctored her at the last, and there was nothing to doctor, only to sit, and I sat, the way she'd once told me a man does, not because it was finished but because she wasn't gone yet. Jonah lasted only the one winter after. They said he died of the cold of his lungs, but I signed the paper, and I will tell you what I thought even if I didn't write it. A man can walk a year north out of hell toward a light, and when the light goes out, he hasn't got another year's walking left in him, and he doesn't want it. I found him in the chair by the fire where he'd sat that first night, and the lamp had burned out beside him, the oil gone, and I have never in my life been able to decide whether that was the saddest thing I ever saw or the most fitting, and I am an old man now and I have given up deciding. I kept the station's old front window lamp. It sits on my mantel. I'm too far gone to ride the grade anymore, and there's a real road through there now with the coaches and the lights, and nobody steers by a window lamp these days. But of an evening I fill it and I light it and I set it where I can see it from my chair, and my wife, God rest her, used to ask me why I burned good oil on a lit night, and I'd tell her the same thing Marin told that teamster all those years ago. So a man walking can find it. That is the whole of it, near as I can tell it. The basin called her a fool for 7 winters, and she kept a lamp lit for a dead man, and the dead man wasn't dead. He was just a long way off, walking, with her light in his head the whole hard way home. I have doctored this country 41 years and seen most of what there is to see of how people use each other and fail each other, and now and again, when it counts, hold faith with each other past all reason and all evidence and all the patient advice of fools like me. And of everything I've seen, that lamp is the thing I hold to. Keep the light lit. You never know who's walking toward it in the dark. That's the only doctoring I've got left to give, and I give it to you for nothing, the way Marin Holloway gave everything, with the door open and the kettle on, so a man walking can find his way home.